All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, and I think we do have a few groups joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms and into homes around the world. Today marks our first day of October, so in September, in just 16 full class days, we ran 52 programs with amazing scientists, conservationists, and organizations around the world. So thank you so much for spending your first month back with us as we continue to highlight such amazing people and places. Today, we're diving back in with one of our most popular kinds of programs. We are going live to the lemur forest at the Duke Lemur Center in North Carolina. We have done 25 plus programs at the Lemur Center over the last year and a bit, and it's always exciting to get a chance to interact with real live lemurs with education specialist Megan, who's going to walk us through and highlight all the amazing animals they have there. So without further ado, Megan, thank you so much for joining us today, and take us away. Let's do it.
Hi there, everybody. So the lemurs aren't here quite yet. There is a plane going overhead, though, so if you hear an odd noise in the background, that's why. So I'm here at the Duke Lemur Center in Durham, North Carolina. So we are the world's largest and most diverse collection of lemurs outside of their native Madagascar in the world. And we have over 200 lemurs living here at the Duke Lemur Center. And we have 15 different species. One of those is bush babies. The rest are all different types of lemurs. And we also do conservation work all the way across the world in Madagascar, and we have a non-invasive research program that we run here as well. So we will have the lemurs joining us in just a moment. I'm hanging out in their forest habitat. You can see that we have some feeding structures behind me, the bamboo and kind of the wire mesh that you see hanging there. And before the lemurs come out, I thought this would be a good time to introduce what the heck is a lemur? So most people, when they think of lemur, they think of cute little ring-tailed lemurs that have the striped black and white tails, the gray bodies, almost cat-like little faces with the pointy ears. And that is definitely a type of lemur. I like to call them the poster child for the lemur. So that's the lemur we all know and love. But there's actually 100 different species of lemur living in the world. So the fact that we have 14 different species of lemur living here sounds really impressive, until you think about all of the lemurs living over in Madagascar. And that island, Madagascar, off the coast of Africa, is the only place in the world that you're going to find the lemurs. So that's one of the things that makes them so special. Another thing that makes lemurs really, really special is that they are part of the primate family. And I hope you guys know who else might be part of the primate family. Some of you might be thinking of monkeys, some of you might be thinking of chimpanzees, but maybe some of you are pointing a finger at yourselves and at your classmates, because we're all primates too. That's where we fit in the organized groups of animals. And so lemurs are a very distant relative of ours. They may not look like it at first glance, but hopefully today you'll see some characteristics that look a little familiar, maybe like gripping hands with those semi-opposable thumbs. We have fully opposable thumbs. Living in social groups and taking care of each other. So we actually do share a little more in common with lemurs than you might think at first. So with that, I'm going to turn around my camera, because I know you didn't come here to see me and I'm not offended. I'm going to turn my camera around so that we can see the lemurs coming out to join us. So we have one of our animal care staff members. Jenna is coming out, and she is coming out and she's actually clanging 2 bowls of food together as she comes out. And that is what we call an auditory cue. That is her way of telling the lemurs, hey, it's breakfast time. We're heading to breakfast. So you can see behind her is a family of ring-tailed lemurs. This is actually our largest group of ring-tailed lemurs living together out in the forest here. So I'm really excited for you to see them today. In the wild, ring-tailed lemurs can live in groups that are much larger, maybe 20 or 30 different lemurs living together. But kind of like it is with big groups of us, the more people you have involved, the more lemurs you have involved, the more often you run into trouble. So sometimes they run into conflict and things. So we like to keep the groups a little smaller here to make sure everybody's getting along and nobody gets into any scuffles or disagreements. So our ring-tailed lemurs are settling, and I can see in the distance that our cockerel shafak are coming. So in the distance behind the ring-tailed lemurs, in that direction, keep an eye out, and you're going to see a very special lemur approaching through the trees. They actually move differently than most of the other lemurs that you're going to see, and the other lemurs that live here. So our ring-tailed lemurs move on all fours. That means they're quadrupedal. Quad meaning 4, pedal meaning to do with feet. Kind of like we are bipedal. We have two-footed movement that we do. We don't walk around on all fours. The cockerel shafak that you're going to see approaching in just a minute, they're slow coming to breakfast. You're going to see them moving on two legs, but not quite like we do. They're going to be hopping along rather than walking along. And I know the sun kind of makes it a little difficult to see too, so I'll let you know when they're a little easier to see. And for now, maybe I'll take a moment to introduce our ring-tailed family. Now, I studied their identification chart before I came out here, so let's hope that I get this right, because it can be a little tricky to tell them apart since the boys and girls are basically the same size, and everybody looks pretty similar to each other. So I believe right down here we have Arrakis. This is the dad of it. Nope, we don't. Yes? Yep. Yes, that is. Okay, I got it right, guys. So that's Arrakis. That's the dad of the group. He's actually a very old gentleman. He's either in his late 20s or early 30s. I believe it's late 20s. He's one of our oldest free rangers out here in the forest, and he's doing very, very well. Right down here, we have Liesel. She just ran over, and you notice that Arrakis ran away right away when Liesel came over. That's because girls are in charge in ring-tailed lemur families, and most lemur families. So he knew to get out of her way because it was time for her to eat. Oh, the one who just ran by us is Griselda. And then right up here, we have Hedwig. Hedwig is giving us a nice pose, so I'll pause here for a minute so you can see her. Oh, she says bye. One important thing about working with wild animals, we can't control where they go. All right, and oh, here comes our cockerel shafak. Can you see them bouncing through the trees coming in? So there we go. Oh, we have a little disagreement. Mom is reminding Dad who gets first grab at the food. And Dad happily hops over to the next area for food because he knows he's not in charge. So let me introduce you. We'll walk a little closer. Just wanted to give you a nice view of them leaping across through the trees. Okay, so we're gonna walk a little closer. And right here, this is Mom. And you can see that she's kind of wondering what I'm doing here and why I have a camera, but then she says, I don't really mind. I'm just going to eat my food instead. Oh, she just pulled out a nice big chunk of carrot to snack on. Carrot's one of their favorite things they get in their food. Oh, she said not that piece though. All right, and right over here is the rest of the family. So here we have Eustace. Eustace is their son, and he is either 2 or 3 years old now. I can't quite remember, but he's not quite in adulthood yet. He's still living with Mom and Dad. And then this is Dad Marcus. His full name's actually Marcus Aurelius. Our cockerel shafak are named after Roman emperors and empresses, so they have very impressive names. All right, so there's our cockerel shafak. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the difference between these two types of lemurs, and then I'm going to go ahead and go for questions because I know we have a lot of groups joining us, and hopefully I can cover more in those questions. So cockerel shafak not only are unique because of how they move on those hind legs, and you can see they're kind of like tree huggers. They move around through the trees and they land kind of hugging and facing those trees. And they jump so far, they can actually jump up to 20, 30 feet in a single bound between the trees. Now that means they jump across between the trees that far. They don't jump up that far. When they're jumping up, it's still impressive. They can jump a good 6 to 8 feet up into the trees, but not quite as far as they can jump across in the trees. And these guys are found in the western part of Madagascar, specifically the northern part of Madagascar, in what we call deciduous forests. And hopefully most of you guys in North America are pretty familiar with deciduous forests because most of us have them all around us. I'm currently surrounded by a lot of deciduous trees. And all that means is that the leaves fall off the trees when the seasons change. So in the fall, we've got lots of leaves starting to fall around me. So we have deciduous trees around us. So they feel pretty at home in this forest as long as it doesn't get too cold for them. And then let's go back over to our ring-tailed lemurs. Hopefully they'll stay settled for just a moment for us. So we'll see if Hedwig will stay settled for us. So Hedwig is enjoying and snacking on a piece of lemur biscuit that's a specially formulated chow for primates. Kind of like dogs and cats can eat dog and cat food, we can buy special primate food that we feed to them, along with other bits of veggies and fruits and things. So ring-tailed lemurs, as I mentioned earlier, are the most popular type of lemur that most people have heard of. And they're a very hardy little species. They live in the southern part of Madagascar, in the spiny desert region. And the spiny desert is about as nice to live in as it sounds. It's very, very dry, not a lot of food everywhere, and really spiny, sharp thorns on the branches of the leaves and the bushes and things that grow there. Sorry, the trees and the bushes that grow there, and not a lot of food available. So this is a very hardy species that can survive in really harsh conditions. So they don't mind the forest at all here because it's actually a little nicer for them. Oh, and that was Gretel who just walked by us. And for those of you who are curious about how I'm telling them apart, let me see if I can get close to somebody who's got what we call a tail shave. So Hedwig here is a little easier. She only needs to be identified by the fact that she's a little lighter than everybody else. And you probably can't see it on the live stream, but she's got a little cowlick at the top of her head, right in the middle of her head. She's got a little point that sticks up, kind of like an alfalfa. And so that helps us tell her apart. Let me see. Let's see if Gretel will stay put for us. So Gretel here, oh, she's not only staying put, she's walking towards us a little. If you look at the base of her tail, it kind of looks a little funny, like there's a chunk of fur missing. And there is, because we actually shaved that spot on her tail. Oh, and here's Liesel. She's got a shave in the middle of her tail. So those tail shaves are a nice, easy way for us to tell who is who. Kind of like if somebody had twins and they couldn't quite tell them apart, so they put them in different haircuts and different outfits. So the lemurs don't mind the different haircuts. They don't notice that they look any different than anybody else. And it just helps us tell them apart, and more importantly, helps the researchers tell them apart when they come here to learn about the lemurs. So if you see anybody with weird bald spots on their tails, don't worry, they're okay. We did that on purpose, and they don't mind the funky haircut. All right, so I think that was a good introduction, and I know we have a lot of people joining us with questions, so I think maybe I'll pass it back to Jesse and start answering questions.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Megan, for such a beautiful introduction. And what amazing lemurs up close today. This is really a special presentation, even by the standards of the other ones we've done. So we've got 6 classes live. We've got at least 9 joining on YouTube and 50 plus people on top of that. So 350 or more kids today. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us. I'm going to go to Mr. Cull's class first in Cobalt, Ontario. So if you just want to demute your microphone, I'll bring you into the broadcast and we'll take a question from you guys to kick us off. Mr. Cull's group, yeah, come on up if you'd like. Hey guys, do you have a question for us?
Put up your hand if you do.
And if not, I can come back. Oh, there we go.
We've got one. Alex?
Yeah.
Why do different lemurs have different tails?
Why do different lemurs have different tails, Megan?
That's a very good question. So most lemurs have very similar tails in terms of how long they are and what they look like compared to the rest of their body. So most lemurs have pretty long tails like this. They just have tails that are different colors. And the reason that their tails are different colors is probably the same as the reason that the lemurs themselves are different colors. And that is because it just has to do with how they evolved on the island. So I'll talk a little bit about the function of the tails, and then I'll talk about why they look different. So the function of the tail is to help them balance as they move through the trees. So and also for the ringtails here, as a signal as they're walking around. They walk around with it held like a little question mark like that. And then everybody can see them move through the trees or on the ground, which they do spend a lot of time on the ground compared to other lemurs. So it helps them balance, and it can also help signal things. Now, the reason that they might look different and be different colors, there might be an advantage to that. Maybe it's the fact that the ring-tailed lemurs can use these black and white striped tails to blend in from predators if they're in tall, grassy or bushy areas in that spiny desert region. But they can see it themselves and see where each other is going as they move along on the ground level with each other. Or sometimes we see things in animals that stick around because they might not necessarily be an advantage. Like we think of survival of the fittest in evolution, and the thing that makes you the strongest or the best at surviving will help you stick around, and that trait will stick around. But sometimes we see things stay that don't necessarily help us survive, but don't necessarily keep us from surviving either. So we don't know for sure why each of the tails looks the way that it does, and we might never know if there's not a really obvious reason for it to look that way. Hope that made sense. That was kind of a big answer.
Hey, that was a great answer. Thanks, Megan. I want to go to our kindergarten class in Riverside, Connecticut. So Miss Martellino's class, if you guys have a question for us, come on in.
Hi there. Yes, we do have a question. One of our students wanted to know, do lemurs eat fish?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a great question. So to our knowledge, lemurs do not eat fish. And the main reason they don't isn't necessarily that they don't like the taste or something like that. They just wouldn't have a reason to eat fish because lemurs do not like swimming. We actually have a pond. You probably can't see it in the broadcast, but right back there is a pond, and the lemurs never go into it. They might hang out in the trees around the pond, but they don't go swimming. They don't go into it. So they wouldn't find fish in the wild, and I don't know of anybody who's ever offered them fish in human care. But I do know that ring-tailed lemurs like these guys and some of the smaller nocturnal lemurs are what we call opportunistic eaters. And that means that they will eat pretty much whatever they come across that they think tastes okay. So we've seen our ring-tailed lemurs eating bugs, eating grubs. They'll eat nuts and berries. They'll eat flowers from the bushes around them. So lemurs like this, I'd say, would be more likely to try fish if they happen to come across it. Whereas the cockerel shafak that we had on the other side, the ones that bounced in the trees, you would never see them eating fish because they have to eat a really special diet of leaves. So lemurs don't eat fish, but if a lemur were to come across it and suddenly decide to eat it, it would probably be a ring-tailed lemur. They're pretty thrifty when it comes to food.
Fantastic. Thanks, Megan. For all the world, it looked like that lemur was photosynthesizing and just taking in the sun. So see, not just us. All right. It's Woodley's class in Brantford, Ontario. They're on YouTube, and they wanted to ask a question related to something you were talking about earlier. Is there a leader in the lemur social groups? And if there is, how is that determined, Megan?
So the leader is usually the mother of the group. So it's always going to be a female. Well, always is a big word. It's almost always going to be the female in lemur troops. You see a lot of female dominance in almost all the lemur species that are in social groups. And in this particular group of ringtails, we have a really interesting thing that's happened. So we have mom, Liesel, who is over across the way. Another ringtail just ran towards her. She's taking a drink over there. Oh, no, sorry, that was Griselda. All right, well, Mom Liesel is somewhere around me, and I lost track of her. Oh, there she is, stealing out of somebody else's bowl. Here we go. The cockerel shafak food has a lot more tasty veggies in it, so she's gone to raid the food from her neighbors. All right, let me get to the sun isn't quite as bad. There we go. So this is Liesel, and she is the one in charge of this troop. And she's actually not the oldest female in the group. Her mom actually still lives with us. Is that Schroeder? That's a racket. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I was just finding Grandma. So this is Grandma Schroeder. And Schroeder's one of my favorite lemurs we have here. She's another elderly lemur. She's in her late 20s. There she is, pretty girl in the sun. And Schroeder here is actually the grandma of the troop. And normally, when mom takes over and grandma is no longer in charge, then grandma gets kicked out. It sounds really harsh, but lemurs aren't like humans. They don't stay together as one big family. But in human care here at the Duke Lemur Center, there's a lot less pressure on the lemurs. Their pal Jenna brings out all of their food that they need every day. They have lots and lots of space to roam around and eat in the forest. Nobody's competing with them for that food, and nobody's trying to find them and eat them like a fusa, a wild carnivore in Madagascar, would be doing. So that means they don't always feel as much pressure to follow the same rules as the wild lemurs living in Madagascar. So in this family, we actually see that Liesel, who actually just came over and ran across right here, let Schroeder stick around, and Schroeder just moved to the bottom of the list of who's in charge. So the bottom of that list. So she's not in charge anymore, but she can still stay with the family. She can sunbathe with them, and she spends time grooming her grandkids as well. So that's something you really wouldn't see as often in the wild, but that you can see here that's really interesting. So the short answer is girls are in charge, usually mom. The long answer is it can always be more complicated depending on the group.
Fantastic. Thanks, Megan. All right, I want to go to Miss Neiley's class in Kincardine, Ontario. If you guys have a question for us, come on in.
Why are the girls the boss?
Why are the girls the boss, Megan?
So that's a great question, and it's another one that's going to be a little long. Bear with me. So you don't, in primates in particular, so in our family group and the lemurs family group of animals, you don't see boys starting to be in charge until you see later evolution in primates. And what I mean by that is that lemurs evolved about 55 to 60 million years ago. So they're a very old member of the primate family tree. But then as you move forward in time and you get to where monkeys evolved and you get to where apes evolved, you start seeing more of this. This is a good word to learn, but it's a big one. You start seeing more of what we call sexual dimorphism. And what that means is dimorphism, two differences between the sexes. So between males and females, between boys and girls. So once you get to monkeys and apes, you start seeing the boy animals being larger than the girls. And if you think of something like a gorilla, this becomes really, really obvious. If you look at gorillas, the boys are so much bigger than the girls, and it's really, really amazing. Sometimes they're 2 or 3 times the size of them. And so in those groups, it makes sense that the boys are in charge because they're the protectors. They're the ones making sure the family is safe. And they're just the biggest and the baddest to make sure that their family stays safe. Now, in lemur families, the boys and girls are the same size. There is no difference in the size between them. So in that case, if the boy isn't bigger, well, then it doesn't really make sense for him to be in charge and be the protector because he's not any bigger and stronger than the girl. So in that case, it makes more sense for the girl to be in charge because she's the one in charge of making and raising babies. So she's the one that grows them in her belly when she's pregnant, and she's the one that has to protect them when they're clinging onto her belly as they're moving around through the forest. So it makes sense that she would be in charge because she's got to be the one to get the best access to all the food, the best access to the safest sleeping spots. And so that's why she gets to be in charge, because the boys and girls aren't different sizes and because she has a very, very important job. So I hope that made sense. That was a long one.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Megan. You never need to worry about nailing the answers because you know this like the back of your hand. It's fantastic. I want to go to Miss Morrison's class in Jackson, Michigan. If you guys have a question for us, come on in.
We have several questions. Skylar, do you have one?
I forgot it.
You forgot it? Okay. Amelia, come on up. And if you stand in front of the camera, they can see you.
Why don't they like fish?
Ooh.
So what I was saying was that they don't necessarily like or not like fish. They just never have a chance to eat it because they don't go in the water, and fish live in the water. So if you never reach your little hands into the water, you wouldn't know that there's something there to eat. So we don't know if they would like it if they tried it, but they never find it out in the wild.
Excellent, guys. All right, I want to take a question from YouTube. I love this. Tariq in Miss Bennett's class wants to know if they do a mating dance. Do the males do a dance for the females, Megan?
So I don't know of lemurs that do an official mating dance like what we think of for birds. Some birds have really amazing courtship and mating rituals. But lemurs will definitely do things to impress the ladies. One of the funny things that ring-tailed lemurs, there's a ring-tailed lemur over there moving through the trees. What they'll do is the males will actually jump and leap up into the air for the female's attention and basically show how high they can jump, and that's really impressive. But I'd say the biggest thing that male lemurs do for female attention, so boy lemurs do for girl attention, is that they have to have the right smell. So lemurs have a very important thing called scent glands all over them. And scent glands are a gland that secretes basically the smell of that particular lemur. So if we look at Marcus here enjoying his breakfast, I'm hoping he'll lean back and you'll be able to see his neck. I can't quite see it, but at his neck, it's a little darker and it's almost a little bit of a bald patch under his neck, under his chin, because he's got a scent gland there and he's got this oily secretion that comes out there. Think of it kind of like, not quite, but kind of like sweat coming out of our armpits, you know? It's a little bit stinky. Everybody stinks a little bit different than everybody else. But for lemurs, it's really, really important to communicate because lemurs, like Marcus, have this long, wet nose. So you can see his nose. Oh, my phone is not. There we go. You can see his nose is a little longer than ours, and it's actually wet at the end, like it would be for a dog or a cat. And I'm going to move us over to hopefully a ring-tailed lemur. Nope, they're moving further away. We'll stay with Marcus. So that is actually the best way that they have to communicate with one another. And so they use that really long, wet nose to smell just like a dog would. They have a lot better sense of smell than we do. And so the females will use that sense of smell to smell wherever the male has left his scent. So he'll mark it on trees, he'll mark it on things around him. And that's one of the ways that the female tells if she's going to like him and if she's going to decide to be mates with him or not. So basically, the lemur with the right stink is the one who gets the girl.
There's a lesson to take home, kids. Patrick on YouTube had a cool question. I love this. I've never seen it before. Do lemurs climb up and down trees head first like squirrels can, or do they have to come down rear first like cats do?
So they can climb up and down like most cats do, although I would encourage you to check out some of the small South American cats who can actually climb trees head first when they're going down. But these guys climb usually with their heads facing up. We've got a really good moment of Eustace playing over here that I'm trying to make sure you guys get to see. So let me adjust. And maybe he might even show you that he's very good at hanging upside down too. So they usually don't travel down with their head first, but they will hop up and down with their legs underneath them. But when they're getting food up in the trees, you'll see them hanging upside down to get the food. So it's not like they're uncomfortable being upside down. It's just not the way that they climb down the trees. That was a really good question, though. I haven't gotten that before.
No, me either. That's fantastic. This is great footage, Megan. We'll just stick on this for a minute. I want to go to Miss Penfold's class. So they're joining us in Orangeville, Ontario. Lovely Orangeville. So Miss Penfold's group, if you guys want to ask a question, come on in and go for it.
How much food do lemurs eat a day?
Yeah, nice question.
Oh, that's a great question. And the answer is one you probably hear a lot if you've been watching our broadcasts about lemurs from the Duke Lemur Center. And the answer is, it depends. It depends on the type of lemur. It depends on the age of that lemur. But basically, each type of lemur here has a diet that the vets figure out is the best diet for them. And then if we notice that that particular lemur is getting a little chubby, we might lower that diet. Or if we notice they're getting a little thin, we might bring that diet up a little bit. But it really depends on the type of lemur. So I'll give you a scale. We have mouse lemurs living here, and their entire diet, their whole meal for the entire day that we split up throughout the day, can fit in one of those little teeny Dixie cups that we probably used in kindergarten class that are really small. And it only fills it up about halfway. So that's a mouse lemur that's about the size of a mouse. Whereas if you look at these cockerel shafak, we put their bowls or their food in these nice big metal bowls. I'll actually go over so you can see one as Eustace bounces around and plays. So we put their food in these big metal bowls, and they've cleaned it out now, but it probably came up to about halfway up this bowl, about that high. So it really depends on the type of lemur. And that's not even including all the snacking they do out here in the woods when they eat lots of leaves and berries from out here.
Fantastic. We've got another 12 minutes for questions. We're whipping through these guys, which is great. I'm going to go to Miss Michael's class, Avoca West Elementary. So if you guys have a question in Glenview, Illinois, come on in and we'll see if it's going with the tech. Hi there. Oh, we can come back. So Avoca West, if you guys have a question, type to me in the chat bar, okay? And I'll take it from there. I will pass along Ms. Gertson's class question in Buhler, Kansas. So they want to know, are lemurs in any danger, Megan?
They unfortunately absolutely are. So lemurs as a group, that 100 species of lemur that I mentioned live in Madagascar, that's the most endangered group of mammals on the planet. And remember, mammals includes everything from tiny mice all the way up to giant elephants. So that group of 100 lemurs, sorry, Eustace is being very silly for a very serious subject. So that group of lemurs is very, very endangered. And the number one threat facing lemurs is habitat loss or deforestation. So that's people cutting down the trees in Madagascar. But I do want to point out that Madagascar also has a very big population of humans. And the humans, most of the time that are cutting down the forest, are just trying to feed their family and are just trying to make a living. So it's very complicated. And I want to make sure you guys understand that it's not that anybody in Madagascar hates the lemurs or doesn't want them to survive. It's just there's not quite enough land for the lemurs and the humans to survive, which is part of what we're trying to figure out with our conservation work in Madagascar and working with the people living there. Sorry that Eustace isn't taking the subject very seriously there.
On the contrary, I think Eustace is just trying to get away from the dark story and run away and play. It makes it much better that way. I'm going to take a question from Miss Arnaud's class joining us in Stittsville. I think we have every Ontario classroom in the entire province in this broadcast. So welcome into all of Ontario. Nice to have you guys here. So Ms. Arnaud's class wants to know how long lemurs can live. We've covered what they eat a little bit, but how long do they live, Megan?
So again, this is a big it depends question. It depends not only on what type of lemur we're looking at, but where they live. Do they live in human care here at the Duke Lemur Center, where they're going to live usually a little bit longer because they're a little bit spoiled? Or do they live in different parts of Madagascar? If they live in a nice big protected forest in Madagascar, they might live a little longer than if they live in a smaller habitat kind of on the fringes where there's more habitat loss. So it really depends, but I'll give you the example of the lemurs that are right in front of me. So cockerel shafak here, they can live here at the Duke Lemur Center into their early to mid 20s. That's a nice, long, happy life for them. And then the ring-tailed lemurs that we saw earlier, they can actually live a bit longer, into their late 20s and early 30s. The oldest lemur we ever had here at the Duke Lemur Center lived until 37 years old, and that was a red-ruffed lemur. In the wild, the oldest lemurs I've heard of have hit their early 30s, so they can live that long in the wild, but it really depends on where they live and if they have enough food, enough space to live that long.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Megan. All right, the Avoca students wanted to know, do they live in caves ever?
So to our knowledge, I don't know every species of lemur, so let's leave a little drop of skepticism there with my answer. I don't know, there might be a small nocturnal lemur that would surprise me, but to my knowledge, they don't live in caves. But what's interesting is one of our largest collections of lemur fossils that we have in our oldest collections of lemur fossils that we have in our fossil division here at the Duke Lemur Center is actually from a cave deposit. We actually have skulls that were left in caves when the lemurs died. And then the caves actually formed crystallized structures. So they're kind of like crystal skulls. They kind of shimmer a little bit and they're really interesting. And you can actually find those in some of our footage that we've done with Matt Borths from the fossil division. So at some point there were lemurs near caves in Madagascar, but to my knowledge, they don't live in them.
So what you're saying is that the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is in Madagascar. There we go. Straight from Megan. I want to bring up on the screen too, while we're waiting and looking at Eustace, who's having the best time ever. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you can either find it with the link below, or you can just go to our YouTube channel, Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, and look up the Duke Lemur Center playlist. You can find Matt's presentation and a whole other slew of amazing talks from members of the Lemur Center. Some really, really great stuff there. So I really encourage you guys to check that out. And you can also learn more at lemur.duke.edu. Some amazing researchers, amazing education being done by their organization. So do check that out. Again, we're ripping through these. I'm going to try and take a whole other round of questions. I'll do my best. We're going to go to Mr. Cull's class first. If you guys have another one for us, just demute your mic and come on up.
Landon?
What would happen if a male lemur was the leader of the group?
Ooh, the male lemur was the leader for the first time ever, Megan. What's going on?
That's really hard to answer. Oh, sorry. Eustace is now showing off hanging upside down. I don't know if you can see it. So the short answer is it just wouldn't happen in most lemur troops, because not only are the girls very good about letting the males know they're in charge, but most of the time the males, like Marcus here, you saw earlier, he hopped right out of her way. So he understands that she's in charge. And so he's going to act that way too. If you end up with a more dominant male who tries to take charge from the female, it gets really, really hard to manage that group. And they end up getting into fights because that's not the natural order of things. So the way I compare it is, in humans, we have to know who's in charge, right? You guys wouldn't learn nearly as much if your teacher weren't there, kind of in charge, making sure you guys stay on track. So it's really important in groups of primates in general to have somebody that's in charge. So in humans, it might be a girl, it might be a boy, but whoever it is, the person that's in charge, generally things go best if everybody listens to the person that's in charge. So with lemurs, the mom's in charge and dad knows his life is going to be easier if he just goes ahead and goes along with what mom says. And if he doesn't, it gets a little harder to live with mom.
Fantastic. We got a great question from Ms. Michael's class. I want to make sure we get it. So I want to bring it in right now. Can lemurs ever live domestically? Can you speak to lemurs in captivity or domestic settings, Megan?
So I think this person is probably asking about domestication rather than in captivity. So I'll cover both. Here at the Lemur Center, obviously, lemurs, even though they're out in a forest here, this is human care. This is what we would consider captivity. This isn't their natural habitat in Madagascar. So lemurs can successfully be kept in human care in zoos and research facilities like ours. But when it comes to lemurs living in domestic settings, living in like a pet setting, The answer would be no, that does not work very well. Primates in general and any wild animal is going to do best when they're allowed to live in the wild or live as wildly as possible. You'll notice that this whole time we've been doing this program, none of the people you've seen, myself included, have come close enough to touch the lemurs, to do anything with them. And sometimes when I've gotten really close, the lemurs have kind of looked up, making sure that I'm not going to come any closer and bother them. So the lemurs here are still wild animals, even though we take care of them. And they still know that they have a bubble, that we're not going to go in any closer than that, and they have their personal space. When it comes to pet animals, the animals that make the best pets are the animals that have actually evolved to be pets. So dogs and cats spent generations evolving separate from us to be a little more used to living with humans and starting to rely on humans. So you can't domesticate an individual animal. That's an evolutionary process that has to take place over generations. So the short answer is lemurs do not make good pets, and the people who can take care of them are people who work in professional settings like zoos and non-invasive research centers like you.
Yeah, fantastic. I want to segue off that with just two quick messages. One for students in Canada and the US and internationally. When you go to a facility to see live animal interaction somewhere like the Duke Lemur Center, look for AZA or CAZA certification. And so typically, not all the centers in the world have this or have sought it out, but if you see AZA or CAZA, it means that that center is up to the highest standards of animal care. So if you support institutions and organizations like that, so like in Toronto where I am, the Toronto Zoo and Ripley's Aquarium both have that certification. That means they're up to the highest standard and those animals are going to be really well cared for. That's really important to make those decisions when you're going to these sort of institutions. And two, and something that we cover in a lot of our broadcasts, I think it dovetails nicely with the idea of lemurs not being good pets, is when you go to international destinations, don't do things where you pose with animals. If there's a chance to have a monkey on your head or to ride an elephant, in Thailand, most cases that's not something that you want to be doing with animals, and those animals aren't being well cared for. So it's just really important when you're dealing with animals, working with animals, getting a chance to interact with them, that you're cognizant of those sort of things to help protect wild species. So just wanted to make sure we got that in, and really good question from Miss Michael's class. I want to pass along a question from Miss Malpassa's grade 4 class. How lemurs communicate with one another? Megan?
Sure. So really quick, I want to address why you can't see much on your camera. I don't know if you can see, but that tree that's a little ahead of me is wiggling at the top. That's because the lemurs are hopping around all the way up there. So I am going to flip the camera around to me for a minute and see if I can go track down our ring-tailed lemurs. They walked away a little further, but I don't want to give you guys vertigo as I walk through the forest. So I'm going to focus it on me. So I'm going to go looking for ringtails. And the question was, how do lemurs communicate with one another? So lemurs communicate, it depends on whether they're right in front of each other sometimes. And it also depends on the type of lemur. So lemurs can use vocalizations to talk to each other. So different types of lemurs have different sounds they use, especially when they can't find their family. They will make little sounds and things to try to find each other. The cockerel shafak is actually named after that sound. So the sound that they make when they're lost and looking for their family is a little shafak. So it sounds a little like they're saying shafaka, shafaka. So that's how they got their name. Ring-tailed lemurs, if they're lost, oh, there they are. If they're lost and looking for their family, they'll do a really cute little noise. It's kind of a and so that's how they'll find each other. The main way that lemurs communicate in general, I would say, is scent. So they will leave their scent in places. Ring-tailed lemurs will actually do a little handstand and rub their butt up against trees to leave their smell there. And that scent is very specific to those lemurs. So it's kind of like when dogs lift their leg and pee on trees. That's a great way of communicating and kind of networking with the lemurs around them to say, hey, this is my territory. Or for a boy or a girl to say, hey, I'm looking for a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It's kind of like putting a singles ad out there. So I'd say smell is their biggest way of communicating.
Yeah, fantastic. By the way, this is the first time I think we've ever had the fence live on camera to sort of preclude the question of how they don't escape this forest. There you go.
There it is.
Let's head to our kindergarten class, Miss Martellino's class. If you guys have a question for us, come on up. We got time for another 3 more or so. So let's dive in, everyone.
Yes, we do. We have another question. Do the lemurs ever act aggressively toward other animals?
Interesting.
That's a great question. So the lemurs who live out here in the forest, usually the answer is going to be no to that question. The one time you might see them act aggressively is that the squirrels here get a little intense about trying to steal lemur food, and sometimes you'll see a lemur try to chase off the squirrel, although I'm embarrassed to say more often the squirrels chase off the lemurs. So we have had squirrel issues in the past. But lemurs who live out here in the forest, one of the rules is they can't be aggressive towards other lemurs, and they can't be aggressive towards us, the people who come out here. Because as you can see, we're walking around with the lemurs right around us. We naturally keep our distance, and they naturally keep their distance from us. We can't have lemurs living out here who might be grumpier. Occasionally, you will see lemurs that get a little grumpier towards people. And one of the issues you'll see, actually, if someone tries to raise a lemur as a pet, is once they get old enough to reach adulthood, that lemur very often becomes aggressive towards people because they're confused about who they're supposed to interact with. But as you can see here, the lemurs just go right by me. If they feel like they get a little too close, they leap right along. So typically, no, we don't see lemurs being aggressive towards each other out here. In the wild, lemurs are a little bit tougher. You might see them being a little more aggressive with each other, especially if it's a question of who gets to be whose girlfriend or boyfriend, or who gets to eat that bit of food.
Yeah, fantastic, guys. All right, let's go to Neiley's, Morrison's, and Penfold in that order. So Neiley's class, if you guys have a question for us, go for it.
We're coming. Here comes Jackson.
Hi.
Hi.
Great. Can you pet lemurs? Like, can you pet them?
Like a cat or a dog, yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's a question of can you and what would be the consequences and should you? So for example, these lemurs who are walking by, notice how they speed right up as they go by me and they kind of watch to make sure that I'm keeping my distance. If I were to suddenly decide that I didn't like my job and I wanted to quit in a very grand way, and I wanted to try and pet one of these lemurs, I think the best outcome would be them scratching me and running away. The more likely outcome would be me getting bit, getting into a whole world of issue with this lemur no longer trusting people being around them because someone dared to reach out and try to touch them when they certainly didn't want that to happen. So I could technically be within reach of these lemurs because they know that people here aren't going to bother them, but I absolutely will not try to touch any of them. And I do not ever recommend trying to touch wildlife for two very important reasons. One is that it very likely would result in me getting injured or you getting injured if you tried it by getting bit or something like that. And the second reason is that it's not good for the wildlife. It stresses them out. It makes them very upset. It's not fun for them to have to defend themselves, because if you're an animal like a lemur and you live in the wild, the only time that you're going to be held or touched by something against your will is when it's something trying to eat you. And so if you're a prey animal like a lemur, really the only time you're going to be touched without your consent is probably going to be when something's trying to eat you. And so if I, as a much bigger animal nearby, tried to touch or hold the lemur's immediate thought is, this thing's trying to eat me, I need to defend myself and get away. And that's a really scary situation for the lemur and a bad situation for me. So in summary, please do not touch lemurs, please do not touch wildlife. But I completely understand the thought because they're fuzzy and they're cute. We just have to remember they're wild.
Yeah, I'm really glad we got that message in, and great question to the student. Miss Morrison's class, come on in and take us away. I love that monkey mask, by the way. It's one of the coolest masks we've seen in any of the presentations. So way to go.
Do they have any predators?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So their main predator is a creature called the fossa, and that's spelled Fossa. And that looks a little bit like a wild cat, although it's not in the cat family. It's more closely related to something like a mongoose. And it's about the size of, I think for North America, a good reference is a bobcat, maybe a little taller or maybe a little longer. And the fossa is kind of a rusty brown color, and it will hunt lemurs in Madagascar. It can actually climb up trees facing up and climb down trees facing down because its ankles rotate around in the back to hold it on. So it's a very good lemur predator. Lives around the edge of the island of Madagascar, all around the edge. There's also historically been predators. There was a large bird of prey, but that bird of prey is actually unfortunately severely endangered, and I think at least one of the predators might have gone extinct. And then if you're a tiny mouse lemur, there are animals like constricting snakes living on Madagascar that would try to eat you as well. So they have a couple different predators. But remember, predators don't mean threats. Predators just form a natural balance with their prey. The threat facing them would be the things that are caused by the people.
Fantastic. And you can check out some of those things in, again, some of the other Duke Lemur Center sessions. So check out Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So much out there. And October 30th, we're going to be doing a whole slew of lemur programs covering some of the conservation issues. So do check that out. We'll be announcing it fairly soon. All right, let's go to Miss Penfold's class to wrap us up.
Hi, we'd like to know how much their brains are similar to humans. Like, do they show their emotions or feel the same emotions?
Nice question.
Ooh, this is a big question for the end. So first I'm going to talk about physically their brains. And this is another one I would recommend checking out some of Matt's presentations with the fossils. Lemurs, even though they're in the primate family, one of the big differences for most lemurs compared to humans is that their brains aren't as big compared to their bodies as other primates. You really start to see brains get much larger in the monkeys. The big exception to that is my favorite lemur, the ii, and I know Jesse loves them too, so he can put that name in the comments for you. So the ii is one of the exceptions. It has a very large brain, but the other lemurs do have much smaller brains compared to other primates. Now, compared to like a cat or a dog, they still have pretty big brains. And when it comes to whether or not they can think and feel and things the same way we do, well, that's a really big research question. And as scientists, folks have to figure out, how do I actually find the answer to that question rather than think and feel my way to what I think and feel might be right? It's our job as people, scientists, and myself as a communicator of science, I am not a scientist myself, to remember that whether or not we think we know what they're feeling, unless we can design a study to really get at that, we don't really know for sure. So one of the things that we've studied here is whether or not lemurs can remember things that they have seen before, puzzles that they've seen before, or whether or not lemurs can remember the smell of another lemur. But it's much harder to study whether or not lemurs feel the same things. And even if we see lemurs doing things we think might be associated with certain feelings, we have to remember we don't know what's going on in their little brains. So my best answer to that would be, it'd be a great study to try and design to figure out if there's a way for you to figure out what lemurs are feeling or what they might be thinking.
We're going to encourage our classes to become lemur researchers and go conduct that study. And in 20 years, we'll follow back up and do a session just on that. Megan, you were on your toes today. This was like a slew of really, really unique and great questions today from our live classes and from YouTube. This was awesome.
Yeah, it's been great. I didn't get as many of the basic lemur questions. It was really fun. Thank you guys for letting me talk about some more interesting stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I encourage everyone to check out lemur.duke.edu. We're way late, and I've got to dive in with another broadcast in a minute, but I want to end by bringing in every single one of our classes. So if you guys want to join me in saying a big thank you and goodbye to Megan.